Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, December 9th. And tonight, we begin in Winnipeg, where Canada's premiers held a virtual meeting on healthcare funding. And they ended their gathering with a call for a First Minister's meeting as soon as possible. Host Premier Manitoba's Heather Stephenson says she and her fellow provincial leaders would like to meet with the Prime Minister early in the new year. She says Canadians expect their political leaders to get together for necessary and serious discussions to ensure the sustainability of the healthcare systems they depend on across the country. All right, well, meanwhile, Canada is sanctioning dozens of officials and companies from Russia, Iran, and Myanmar a day before International Human Rights Day. Ottawa will freeze any Canadian assets held by 67 people and 9 entities from those 3 nations. The new sanctions include officials who have cracked down on protests against the Russian and Iranian regimes, as well as some of Iran's state media outlets. But experts say Ottawa does not have the capacity to monitor and enforce these sanctions. Well, as calls for a search in a Manitoba landfill continue, Federal Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino says Ottawa will not intervene in the dispute. Dumping at a Winnipeg area landfill has been paused. This comes as calls intensify for a search of the site for the remains of 2 Indigenous women who are believed to have been killed by an alleged serial killer. Police Chief Danny Smythe has suggested that the chances of finding them are low, and the force has decided not to search the landfill. All right, turning to Ontario now, where the provincial government has passed a law to boost some so-called strong mayor powers. The first set of those powers, given to Toronto and Ottawa earlier this year, allows the mayors to veto council decisions which are deemed to hamper the creation of new homes, prepare and table the city's budget, and hire and fire department heads. Toronto Mayor John Tory has said he will use the powers in a limited and responsible way. But Ottawa Mayor Mark Sutcliffe has said he is not interested in using them. To the East Coast now, as Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston says he wants to make it easier for healthcare workers to move between provinces. Mr. Houston issued a statement yesterday saying he spoke about the issue at a meeting of Canadian trade ministers in Toronto. The Premier, who is also the province's trade minister, says if a healthcare worker can be certified to practice in any other province, they should be able to work in Nova Scotia. Mr. Houston spoke more about labor mobility today during a virtual meeting of Canada's premiers. Well, as the COP15 Biodiversity Conference continues in Montreal, the Prime Minister is making some big promises in terms of hitting Canada's conservation targets. Justin Trudeau says that includes protecting 25% of land and marine areas by 2025 and 30% by 2030. And to hit the first goal, the country has just 3 years to protect a bigger area than the province of Ontario, and marine and coastal territory nearly 3 times the size of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Canadians sending parcels this holiday season may be surprised to see a steep surcharge on domestic shipping due to the high price of diesel. The Canadian Postal Service's package surcharge rose to nearly 40% last week on domestic parcels and fell slightly to 37% this week. Canada Post spokesman Phil Rogers says the fuel-based surcharge has been a standard company practice for more than 20 years, and it is based on the average price of diesel. Despite the higher-than-normal prices, Canada Post anticipates a busy holiday season. This comes as Rogers says the Postal Service has hired 4,500 additional staff and 1,550 more vehicles to accommodate the holiday shipping surge. All right, moving to a recall by Canada's Food Inspection Agency. This is for Igor brand Gorgonzola mild-ripened blue vein cheese. This is due to a listeria contamination. The affected product was sold in 350-gram packages with a best before date of February 1st, 2023. Distributed by Jan K. Overwheel Limited, the strong-flavored cheese was sold in Ontario and Quebec. While food contaminated with listeria may not look or smell spoiled, it can still make you sick. So far, there have been no reports of any illnesses linked to the product. Back in the East, Newfoundland and Labrador's Human Rights Commission has handed out its annual award. This year's Human Rights Award winners are Kimberly and Todd Churchill. The couple have advocated for the rights of deaf children to receive an education on the same level as hearing children, particularly in their first language, American Sign Language. Also recognized in yesterday's ceremony were Khadija Raven Anderson and Michael Duffy, both being named Human Rights Champions. All right, stay tuned. We'll have our weekly energy update with GasWizard.ca up next. Dan McTeague joins us. Stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. Now it's time for our weekly energy update with Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at GasWizard.ca. Take it away, Dan.
Well, thank you for that, Nima. And I'm joined today in my little 2012 Ford Escape, my little vehicle, which compared to last June, I'm probably saving somewhere in the order of about $35 on a tank full for this little car. And I'm very thankful for that now that it's Christmas, and I think many Canadians across the country are. Look, we've seen a net drop of about 35 cents a litre in the price of gasoline. Doesn't really matter where you are, although Atlantic Canada could be holding up a little higher. That's mostly because of really markets in complete mode, completely ignoring fundamentals and completely, believing that the world is coming to an end as far as, economic viability is concerned. These numbers look a whole lot more like they believe there's a recession. That's bad news for them. It's good news for us. And of course means in places like British Columbia, Vancouver, in other prices down in the high 150s range. That way this week, the BC interior, they have a lot of movement down. It's probably a room and down about 20 cents a litre. A lot of things, whether that's in Kelowna, whether that's in Prince George, whether that happens to be in places like and you're looking at some pretty significant retail margins. Alberta, of course, best place in the country. You're in the $20s, going to stay there. Saskatchewan, $30s, of course, the difference in taxation is really the only main reason for that. Manitoba, disturbingly and surprisingly, still in the high 150s, early 160s. That suggests to me that they're picking up just 25 cents a litre. Manitoba should be looking at their gas stations and asking the tough questions there. Maybe it's time for them to drop prices. Ontario, the outlook is pretty much the same. It looks like we're not going to see much movement here, but we are seeing prices in the low 130s. Again, those are prices we haven't seen since early December of 2021. And of course, Quebec following not too far away, 148, 149 for Montreal and Quebec City. The Maritimes, they've seen that predicted 10-cent decrease, mostly Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, and Newfoundland, in New Brunswick, but not Newfoundland, where the Public Utilities Board there loves to maintain very high prices and don't really like passing on those price changes, even though they're happening everywhere else. Look, the economic outlook for the economy is not a strong one. It's clear that December will probably be a scrub for most in terms of energy pricing. It's a big relief for many consumers because, of course, we're seeing prices way below anyone could have imagined, including myself. And that's likely to lead to a pretty substantial, dramatic increase in the month of January. A couple of things to keep in mind. At this time of year, American refiners get rid of their gasoline as much as they can, their diesel, their gasoline, their aviation fuel, furnace oil, because they are taxed on year-end inventory. So that's one of the big reasons you're not going to see a lot of headlines because they don't really go that far into why these prices have dropped. It's also, the fact that there is and has been residual concern about COVID lockdowns in China. Outlook for demand continues that it has been since last July to be pessimistic, even though that turns out to be wrong. There is and has been no demand destruction. We're going to be seeing in the month of January, OPEC is going to respond forcefully, probably dropping, production to an additional 2 million barrels. That should smarten up and wake up, a lot of these financial traders, the people that are not involved directly in the actual physical delivery of oil, gas, and all the other products. But in fact, the money managers and hedgers who are really, shorting or using energy as call it what it is, a meme stock. Russia, of course, in response to G7 cap on oil, has now pledged to cut back production. All this really means that we're going to be very quiet, very comfortable, and very helpful. But if I were a betting person, or I'm trying to save up some money to, meet those massive grocery prices, many of them driven high by high energy costs, including the federal government's determination to drive them even higher, with not just one, but two carbon taxes, regulations on our pipelines, I would want to make sure I save up some money because January is going to see a bit of a turnaround. I expect that come the early part of 2023, the first quarter anyways, we're looking at probably a net increase of 15 to 20 cents a liter for gasoline. And note that diesel isn't moving that much. That's because it's in very short supply. Refiners are holding on to what they have, and they're making some pretty substantial margins. So look for those to remain pretty much where they are. Not much change over the next week, especially as we see in January, colder air coming. Well, Nima, that's it for this week from inside my little Ford Escape. We'll talk to you next week, hopefully behind my desk at the office.
All right, thanks for that, Dan. Again, that was Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at GasWizard.ca. He's also the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. All right, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to be turning our attention to the crypto markets. Catherine Murray, host of the Buck Stops here, is going to be filling us in on the world of cryptocurrencies and how the markets have behaved over the past week. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. Now it's time for our weekly crypto and digital asset update with Catherine Murray, host of the Buck Stops here. Take it away, Catherine, all yours.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly crypto and digital asset update. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we are seeing some continued stabilization within the cryptocurrency world, with Bitcoin up by about 1% week over week. It still has 38% of the overall market cap of cryptocurrencies, which currently stands at $850 billion. Ethereum is a distant second with about 18% of the overall market cap. You know, stepping back, we continue to look at the fallout in terms of other companies impacted by FTX's collapse and bankruptcy. One area in particular is the layoffs that we're seeing within the cryptocurrency world. Two exchanges this week announced that they are going to be removing about 30% of their overall headcount. This, of course, on the back of the FTX fallout and after one of their rivals, Kraken, announced some major layoffs as well. So this within the exchange space. Part of this, of course, is attributed to the implosion of FTX and its reverberating effects that we're seeing on confidence as well as margin calls and also, of course, trading volume. Trading volume is down, and that impacts the exchanges. In particular, we are seeing the volumes down quite significantly. And recall that we did see the overall market cap of cryptocurrencies at about $3 trillion. And as I said, we are now having an overall market cap of about $850 billion. So you can really see why these exchanges would be severely impacted. Now, questions, of course, remain in terms of who survives this crypto winter. Maybe it's a crypto ice age, let's see. But BlackRock's Larry Fink, the head of the company, has been a skeptic of crypto and said that most crypto companies won't survive the havoc FTX's fall has unleashed on the industry. Going on to say that I actually believe that most of the companies are not going to be around. Now, on the positive side, I would say that that was so true of many of the dot-com companies that got caught up in the bubble, the dot-com bubble that burst, of course. Many of those internet companies and dot-com companies did not survive, but many did, such as eBay as well as Amazon. So perhaps this is a flushing out of the overall system. Having said that, we are continuing to see the impact of so many companies and individuals who have been employed within this industry. There's a hedge fund that was also hit by FTX's collapse. They defaulted on about $36 million of debt. The company's orthogonal trading, and they said in a tweet just this week that they had been severely impacted by the collapse of FTX and the associated trading activities. So again, a lot of margin calls were put in place, and that is what squeezed many, many players within the space. Now, it's also taking a toll on deals within the cryptocurrency world. Circle, which is the issue of the world's second largest stablecoin, said that their planned merger with a SPAC, Concord Acquisition Corp, has also been scrapped. Now, the valuation of this back in February of this year looked to be around $9 billion. So again, you can see the billions of dollars that have been wiped away given the fallout of FTX. Importantly as well, Canada's largest pension fund, CPI, they've announced, according to Reuters, that they are ending their effort to study investment opportunities in the volatile crypto market. Again, that is according to Reuters. This also follows two of Canada's other largest pension funds writing off their losses in FTX, that's the crypto exchange that we've been talking about, and also the crypto lender Celsius. Importantly, though, it is just important to discuss that crypto is different from blockchain technologies. Crypto is just one application. As we think about blockchain, think about peer-to-peer payments, authentication of assets and tokenization of assets. And that allows you to be in control of what you own with your own identity following that. So many applications, and one really interesting aspect of this occurred this past week, where there was a bond offering in Europe, and they were able to settle it in, rather than 50 days, they were able to settle it very, very quickly, in 60 seconds actually. So speed and efficiency is what we also get to see through the use of blockchain. And lastly, Goldman, UBS, as well as Banco Santander, along with two DeFi companies, were able to announce the successful completion of the first proof of concept delivery versus payment repo settlement on a DeFi platform. The reason why this is important is because it brings us perhaps one step closer to intraday settlements. Nima, I'll leave it there. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, which airs on Sundays at 9 a.m. Eastern, only on the News Forum Network. All right, stay with us. Up next, we've got more news from around the world as Japan announces the development of a fighter jet with the UK and Italy, and the UN official speaks on the first execution of a convicted Iranian protester. Stay with us. Ukraine's finance minister says crucial Western financial aid is not charity, but self-preservation, as donor countries share the price of turning back Russian aggression. Serhiy Marchenko told the Associated Press in an interview on Thursday that his country is protecting freedom and democracy far beyond its borders. He said he believes EU officials will resolve their dispute with Hungary, which is holding up 18 billion euros in loans and would cover a large part of Ukraine's looming budget gap. The outside financing is needed to avoid printing money at the central bank to cover basic needs like pensions. Now, this is a practice that would risk fueling already painful inflation. All right, moving to a major defense partnership that saw Japan announce that it will jointly develop its next generation fighter jet with the UK and Italy. Tokyo is looking to expand defense cooperation beyond its traditional ally, the United States. Japan plans to deploy the Mitsubishi FX fighter jet in 2035. It will replace its aging fleet of Mitsubishi F2 jets, which Japan developed with the United States. The new fighter merges Japan's FX and Britain's Tempest, which is being developed with Italy. Japan has expanded defense partnerships in the Indo-Pacific and Europe. All right, well, on the heels of Iran's first execution of a prisoner allegedly involved in a crime during national protests, the UN's top human rights official is responding. Volker Turk told reporters at a news conference in Geneva on Friday that the news is very troubling. He said the Iranian government's decision to carry out the death penalty was clearly designed to send a chilling effect to the rest of the protesters. Mr. Turk called on Iran to immediately institute a moratorium on the death penalty and to release those arrested in connection with the protests. Basketball star Brittany Griner is back in the U.S. after spending nearly 10 months in a Russian prison. The athlete was prisoner swapped in exchange for notorious Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout. Ms. Griner's status as an openly gay black woman injected racial, gender, and social dynamics into her legal saga, and it brought unprecedented attention to the population of wrongful detainees. All right, turning to political tensions in Peru now, where the first female president is pushing to cement her hold on power. Dina Boluarte says she expects to complete the term of her ousted predecessor and buck the trend of presidential failures blighting the country. Yet, even as Ms. Boluarte made the call yesterday, some politicians were already calling for early elections, which is an indication of continued political rancor. Ms. Boluarte was elevated from vice president to replace leftist Pedro Castillo as the country's leader. A new disturbing report says 67 journalists and media staff have been killed around the world so far this year. Now, this is up from 47 last year. The International Federation of Journalists says the war in Ukraine, chaos in Haiti, and criminal groups in Mexico contributed to the 30% spike. The Brussels-based group also tallied 375 journalists that are currently imprisoned for their work, notably in China, Myanmar, and Turkey. The group is calling on governments to take more action to protect journalists and free press. All right, well, meanwhile, the United Nations refugee chief for the Middle East says the region has only received 8% of the funding that it requested for winter gear. This includes fuel and children's clothing. Ayman Garaiba says that compares to 58% by this time last year. Mr. Garaiba says Canada is one of the few countries that isn't pulling back funding for countries hosting asylum seekers. And he hopes Ottawa will encourage its allies to stop lowering their support. He warns that the lack of funds could prevent kids from being educated. Well, it's no secret that this past year, the world has seen the horrific magnitude and impact of climate change. Now, this includes a flood that submerged 1/3 of Pakistan, one of the 3 costliest U.S. hurricanes on record, devastating droughts in Europe, Africa, and China, and deadly heat waves all over. Yet, this wasn't climate change at its worst. With all that death and destruction in 2022, climate-related disaster damages are actually down from 2021. This is according to insurance and catastrophe giant Swiss Re. And it looks like lots of people have been visiting the Royal Canadian Mint in Winnipeg this week to exchange money for a special toonie honoring Queen Elizabeth, who died in September. Over 4,000 people have made the trip for the special coin, which is gold with a black outer ring to symbolize mourning. Mint spokeswoman Adrienne Wilson says demand is so high this week, they are limiting each person to 2 of the coins. But there is no need to rush, as 5 million of the toonies will enter the national coin distribution system later this month. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you again on Forum Daily.